Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Integrated Care Podcast from the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. I am Grace Pratt, the production editor, and I am joined by our full contingent of co-hosts today. I am so excited. After months of sabbaticals and illnesses and trips, we are all here, and personally, I'm feeling a little bit spicy about our topic today, and so I know that we are in for a really good conversation. All about how we talk about and a lot of how we correct misconceptions about what we do in integrated care. I think if you listen to or were at our live show when we were talking about advocacy and connecting with legislation, this is going to connect back for you. If you didn't, I encourage you to go pull that episode and listen to that audio that we released. But regardless of that, we are going to have a great conversation today, whether you are advocating in big ways or small ways or any way in between. Got to learn to talk about what we do. But before I get to that, we are going to do our introductions. And I have to say, so I don't know if you guys know what a Kahoot is. Have you heard of this? A Kahoot?
Yeah.
It's like a quiz
Mhm.
game, sort of. So my oldest son, Henry, who just turned 8, decided to have a Kahoot themed birthday party. And
No
he made
way.
his own Kahoot with questions about Minecraft and axolotls and physics and robotics, all the things that he loves. And we did a Kahoot, and it was honestly a blast. And so when it was time to plan our residency changeover potluck with our new ones coming in and our old ones going out, I was like, I'm going to bring Henry's Kahoot idea. And so with all of our staff and all of our residents and all of our faculty, I got them to tell me, my prompt was simple: what's something most people don't know about you? And then I used a random generator to pick the wrong answers out of everyone. And it was so fun. The things that people came up with, the things that we learned about each other. The most commonly correct answer was 38% of us got it right. So it was really fun. And so anyway, that's prompted me to bring that icebreaker question to you this morning. What is something that most people don't know about you? So we will go around the circle. I'm actually going to go, I guess they're on YouTube now. Maybe some people can see us, although I don't think you see the whole circle. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm going counterclockwise just to give Bridget a little more time. So we're going to start with Jen Thomas.
Oh, you picked me first. I was like, wait, I need to think. I need to think about my icebreaker. That's fine. That's classic. No, it's fine. So I'm Jen Thomas, family medicine, a medical director of integrated behavioral health at Morris Hospital, Morris, Illinois, Northern Illinois. So what is something most people don't know about me? That's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I guess I kind of have a little domestic hat. A lot of my coworkers, they're like, oh, you're a doctor, so you're nerdy science stuff. And I like to make pies. I like to plant flowers and garden and do all that domestic-y stuff. So I think that kind of comes as a surprise to some of my coworkers of yeah, I can make you a really solid mocha pecan pie if you want one.
I was just going to ask what your specialty is.
Yeah. And that was
Fabulous.
my husband, Matt, always says that was the most selfish Christmas gift he ever got me. He got me this book. It looks like an encyclopedia. It's called Pie. It's probably 3 inches thick. And so I'll just pull out that book, and somebody somewhere wrote a fantastic recipe, and we'll just try that. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. So I like to make pies. I don't think most people know that about me. So maybe that's a lame one, but here we are. Now you know.
I love that. And now I super wish we were in person so you could
I know.
bring
You
pie
could
to
try
the
it.
next podcast.
We'll do
Yes.
it. We'll ship you a piece or something.
Cool. Okay. Next on our roundup here is Monica Williams Harrison.
Hello, everybody. Monica Harrison, like a clinical social worker, clinical trainer, practice coach for the AIM Center. I'm trying to think what I have not shared because I share anything. I don't know how to have a code book. So usually my go-to, because I am Black, most people don't know that I actually claw, because that is stereotypically not something that Black individuals do. So I'm going to go with that one. I was trying to think if I'd shared that before, and I can't remember if I did or not. So I don't think I have. So I claw.
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
Oh, when did you pick that up?
Clawing, 4th grade in Oklahoma. So I, military brat, so family moved around all the time. And when we were in Oklahoma, it was just like what all my friends were doing when we moved there. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to do, you want to hang out with your friends. So I was like, well, and actually stuck with it. stopped doing competitions and stuff probably the end of middle school. Because then, traveling every 3 years, military, you move. And so it's a new thing in a new place. But still had clogging shoes, still can clog. It is not like tap dancing. The shoes you wear, the buckles on the bottom are different. So it's a different sound, and it's also not river dancing. That's the other thing I think I've got. That is different. But yeah, so I clog.
That's awesome. What kind of music? Yeah. What's the background? Like what music do you do? Is anything or?
Actually, my favorite is this routine. I don't know if my parents still have a copy of it, but it was this routine that we did to wipe out. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
kind of old song,
The
but
big drums.
there's
Yeah.
this routine. Yeah, so it's this routine that we did to wipe out that's actually my very, very favorite. I don't know that I have the leg capacity to go as fast as I used to because I'm older now, but that's my absolute favorite.
Oh my gosh. If you could dig that up, Monica. But there was an extra embedded fact in there for me. I did not realize that you had lived in Oklahoma.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, so military families, typically every 3 years, you move to a different military base. And so both of my parents were in the military. And so we spent some time in Lawton, Oklahoma. So I can sing the okay, let's go. Yeah.
That's how my kids learned to spell Oklahoma as the song, because it's not just from the musical, it's actually also our state song. Now, when you go to Oklahoma State, like I did, when they play it at like the football games, you go OKLAHOMA, and then you go state.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's like my little, teaching them at the end. They go state. So, just a little indoctrination. No big deal. Got to steer them on the right path.
Hey,
of course, everyone I work with just about went to OU, so I'm the little lone state school holdout. Anyway, moving on. Next, we have Bridget Beachy.
I'm Bridget Beachy, and I'm a clinical psychologist by trade and work as a BHC, Director of Behavioral Health in the state of Washington, a wonderful federally qualified health center. I was kind of feeling like I was in Monica's boat as far as like what people don't know about, some of the main ones would be like, oh, that I have a lizard, but everyone knows that now. Or that I'm from Northeast Ohio. I have an obsession with LeBron James. Everybody knows that. I played 2 sports in college, basketball and softball. Most people know that at this point. But one of the ones that, and this is, I guess, is self-described, I still to this day, based on the definition of what I've seen with the definition of competitive, I don't think that I'm competitive, which everyone tells me is crazy because they're like, you're the most competitive person I know. But for me, it's never like, I don't have a problem losing. Maybe that's what it is. I don't have a problem losing. As long as I did my best and I was the best version of myself, then that's what it is normally for me. I'm competing against, I guess, myself. So like in clinic, we joke around of like, oh, who had the most patients and stuff like that. And so people are like, oh my gosh, so if Dave beats you, does that bother you? I'm like, as long as I gave it my best go, and my best was 14 patients, and he saw 15, it doesn't bother me one bit. So losing does not bother me as long as I brought my best.
Yeah. You strive for excellence.
Do you ever go like,
you give it
last week? Right. But do you ever go like, oh, last week I had 15. Oh, I only got 12 this week. Oh, let me try to be still competitive.
It's more with myself. It's more like if I saw 12.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. If I saw 12 and then like last week I saw 15 and I kind of felt like there was, I still had gas in the tank. I would have been like, man, what could I
just reached the level. She's so good that she can be her only competition. There's no one else in the ring.
The mountaintop.
She's like, what would we say? She's kind of like
She's like LeBron
of BHCs. Against herself.
Honestly, he beats me all the time at all kinds of things, and it really doesn't bother me. Like it's like I'm not competitive with them.
Honestly, that's probably for the best. I don't see how you guys could be married and be working together and be collaborating on all of these things if there was like a bitter competition between you.
Yeah,
people, I'm not as people, but
I'm not. I wish his success is my success. And
You're a great team.
Very sweet. Okay, next we have Neftali Serrano.
Well, it's good to be back on the podcast, everybody. I'm Neftali Serrano, whichever way you're able to say it. I'm the CEO here at the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. And I've been fascinated listening to the rest of you. It's just been great to learn these little nuggets about you. I still have this image of Monica clogging, and I feel like we've got to have a talent show at the conference and just have people do stuff. That would be so awesome. That's great. So, something people may not know about me, and it relates to why my voice sounds the way it is right now, is that I enjoy yelling at children. And that's why my voice is not sounding so great this morning, a little bit Barry Whitish, perhaps. So we have a community swim team, and my wife and I typically serve as the clerk of course for the home swim meets. And that involves really just yelling at children for 3 hours straight. If you can imagine, especially, oh my gosh, I've learned so much about the difference between boys development and girls development, because if you have any 8 and under boys and you compare them to any group of 8 and under girls, clerk of course is perfect because obviously every event is gendered, right? So if you'll see the girls, and they are able to reasonably follow directions, listen to you, listen to what's coming up. Clerk of course, if you're not a swim person, is like, that's where you organize all the kids in seats so that they get ready to go to the blocks to swim. And so they have to be in certain order, and they have to sit, and they have to keep moving forward in these rows of seats to get to swim. And the 8 and under girls can do that. They will listen to you. And in fact, they will actually help each other. Like, oh, you're supposed to move up now. They're talking to each other. The 8 and under boys, I'm telling you, my daughter, who's the head coach of the team, she says, they've got sawdust for brains. That's what she says.
Yeah. It can be like that.
You can look at them. I'm looking at them. I'm literally yelling. I mean, you hear my voice, right? I'm looking at them eye to eye. And I'm like, do not move until I tell you to move.
Not going to work.
Do not
Come
move
on.
until I tell you to move. And of course, I tell some other row to move. There they go, moving up, without me telling them to move. And that is why but I love it. And I enjoy it because I get to know all the kids in the neighborhood. It's so fun to mess around with them. They end up having a great time through they conquer a lot of their fears through the swimming and the competition. So it's really cool and fun, but it does take a lot out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I live with 4 8 and under boys, and I don't know what to tell you. It is very, I got to get eye to eye and say it over and over and then sometimes still,
Right.
Yeah. In one ear, out the other. They're too busy making fart jokes and, poking each other
Right.
to listen.
Oh
But
my
that's all
gosh,
right.
listen, if I hear one more thing and the hysterical laughter that comes every time one of them says ball, I'm so over it. Let me just tell
Speaking
you.
of fart jokes, my son told me a good one last night, my 8-year-old. What do you call a dinosaur's fart? A
What?
blast from the past.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You come for the integrated care content, you stay for the
You
8-year-old.
get everything.
Yes. Okay. I gotta round this out. So I'm Grace Pratt. I am the behavioral medicine faculty at Integris Great Plains Medicine Family Medicine Residency Program in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where I both train residents and supervise behavioral health students in our earliest learners of integrated care. And my little known fact, I cheated because I thought of this last week. But I took welding in high school to raise my GPA. There was a big VOTEC push at my school in rural Texas, and I was taking Latin the fall of my senior year to get an edge up on my ACT scores and all of this. And then I realized, oh, wait, I can take welding and actually get more grade points for that because it's weighted more heavily than Latin. So I switched. And thank goodness I had a friend who was like family owned a farm and she had gear and everything because the shop and the gear of the high school boys in Mount Pleasant, Texas welding shop it would not have been worth the grade point boost. But Ashley came in clutch and I wore her stuff. But I have to say, let's see if I can talk about this without gagging. The most visceral memory that I have is that, again, this is rural Texas. We're out in the Votech building. We're in the shop. So guys are all dipping. And they used to spit their dip into the water where you had to put your metal in to cool it off. And the fumes that would come off as you're pulling out that disgusting metal out of the dip, like it still makes me gag to this day. Almost 20 years later, I have to say. So you're welcome for that imagery.
Renaissance woman. Weld in Latin. How do you say welding in Latin, Grace?
So you know what? I can neither weld nor speak Latin is the best story.
High school's the best, right? Stuff you use.
You dabble in everything. It was great. I think what happened was the shop teacher was also the director of all of the like ag, like they had ag competitions and stuff. And some of them were more like brain power things. So he recruited me to participate in these competitions. And in exchange, he gave me an A in welding, which I did not earn. So there are guys like building full trailers to use on their family farms in one part of the shop. And I'm like trying to cut a straight line in a little piece of scrap metal. It was an adventure for sure.
That's great.
Yeah. So something most people don't know about me. I cannot weld or speak Latin, but I did both in high school. Okay, we got to move on. This is great. I just want to have like a whole potpourri show where we just like, I don't know, talk about more fun things and talk about each other. So maybe we'll put that in the bag for one day. Back to being fired up about the topic though. Well, first, are there news and notes, Neftali?
Yes, just a quick one here. Obviously, those of you who are on the CFHA listserv know that we have launched our conference registration for the fall. So for more information, those of you out there can check out integratedcareconference.com. We've just published the session schedule. So you get to see at a glance all of the sessions that are available. And it's awesome. I mean, like the list of presenters is ridiculous. The topics run the gamut of just about everything you can kind of think of. So really great content. So integratedcareconference.com. The other quick news and note item is those of you out there should know this name because she's awesome. She's such a key leader in the field, Stacy Obeid. And Stacy has put together a continuing education for us on clinical supervision skills. And so that's available on our website. For that, you'd go to our main website, cfha.net, and go under the learning and networking tab, and you'll find her course there. It is a fantastic opportunity. Stacy is a great teacher to really bone up your skills with clinical supervision in PCBH. We'll put the link in the news in the, what do you call that?
Show notes. The show notes.
Show notes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still, I'm recovering from.
He's rusty.
Yesterday.
Well, hopefully this won't make you yell again, but for our topic today, we are going to talk about messaging and communication around integrated care. So like I said at the top of the show, on our live show, we were talking about advocacy and the importance of advocacy and what that can look like. And the takeaway from that whole live show for me, and what I'm learning more and more in my work in other areas around advocacy, is that it happens at every level. Monica's literally in Washington, D.C. right now doing advocacy. You cannot see, well, maybe if you're watching YouTube, you can see like the lovely hotel wallpaper behind her. I'm assuming you're like stashed in a conference room somewhere. But advocacy happens at every level. And so Neftali came across this video that he shared with our podcast team from the New Hampshire House of Representatives. And it's a committee meeting of the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee. And they're talking about a bill or a measure that would essentially endorse primary care behavioral health and endorse integrated care. And we're going to listen to a snippet of it now. And then we're going to like kind of really broaden out the conversation about what happens when we're communicating about what we do. Because as we know, despite like the huge growth in what we do and the whole mission of CFHA, there's still a lot of confusion sometimes about what integrated care even means. And if we're going to be advocating for ourselves, we have to talk and communicate both at the system level and the legislative level and everything in between. So we're going to listen to a clip of this, and then we will talk about it and also broaden our conversation to thinking about like advocacy and communication at a large scale.
Well, I'm doing another mandate. Relative services provided through a primary care behavioral health model.
All right, I'm going to pause there because I forgot to cue it up here. So yeah, Grace said it's a committee meeting, and actually it's a good pause because you can hear the boredom in the guy's as he's talking about this issue that he clearly believes shouldn't be before this committee even to begin with, right? So just to set the stage for those of you in audio podcast land, you just picture a room, a U-shaped table with a bunch of county representatives around the table, looking tired and haggard. They are 3 hours into their meeting, and now this issue about integrated care comes up. Yeah, here we go.
So, John, why don't you come up and take a seat, Jim? If I understand this correctly, that a primary care physician would be consulting with a psychologist. And the psychologist says, yes, Xanax is recommended. Then the primary care physician, because they have the right to order prescriptions, could then order that prescription drug for the patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A psychologist is not licensed to prescribe medication.
So they can't do that.
So they would not, if a psychologist felt there was a medication assessment that was needed, they would refer the primary care physician to a psychiatrist.
So they would refer to it.
They would suggest the primary care physician speak with the psychiatrist through the collaborative care model, which is a different model, but similar.
So why is it some people think that it looks like psychologists are involved in prescription drugs with this bill? Why has that accusation been made by the psychiatrist?
Well, I've spoken with the psychiatrist and have not heard that talking point. I can tell you that there is nothing in here that suggests that psychologists are or requests psychologists be involved in prescribing medication. It's not part of their scope of practice.
Okay. So why do we need this bill? Wait a minute. So Representative Calabro, you have very strong opinions, I think.
Yeah, I've actually experienced this, and it de-escalates situations and it prevents patients from going into the emergency room and using resources that would otherwise have gone to somebody in an actual emergency need. So if I'm sitting here with a patient who's at
You're a
PHQ score,
psychologist.
no, I'm a provider. We've had somebody roomed, they've got a behavioral emergency with a PHQ score, all right, of an elevated number. It lets me know this person is at an elevated risk for a behavioral emergency. Every single person in medicine knows how to deal with that. Okay. We all have protocols about what we do. We either send them to the emergency room or, God bless, we have somebody on call. We can call them down to help and de-escalate the situation. So I'm not sitting with that patient for 40 minutes. I'm staying on time.
So why isn't this already occurring? Why do we have this
spreading everywhere?
So why do we need this legislation?
Because apparently they haven't gotten a clue.
Well,
I would say the insurance companies.
so you're saying insurance companies are refusing what? What did they refuse? Representative,
But the true question is the problem here then that the psychologist lacks a billing code to be able to bill for their time if the primary care physician does that referral for that
we mean Lex billing type.
billing code And let's say the primary care physician does that quick referral for a de-escalation to the psychologist. Is the problem here then that the psychologist lacks a billing code for that quick referral for that de-escalation time?
So, John,
Can I respond, Mr. Chair?
yes,
And thank you for the question. So there's multiple problems here. The problem the representative was speaking to is the urgency of the situation. It's an emergent situation, and either a professional needs to be available to engage with the client to de-escalate them, hopefully de-escalate them, or they're going to be in an emergency room or an inpatient unit. That's the urgency of the issue. In terms of the billing codes, so when we started this process, we reached out to Anthem and we reached out to Point 32. We've had a number of conversations, and those conversations have continued to some extent, and they've picked up over the last couple of days. Anthem first forwarded to my client a list of billing codes applicable to psychiatrists and psychologists. The consultation codes were applicable to psychiatrist contracts. They were listed as not applicable to psychologist contracts. So we raised that with Anthem. And Anthem told my client that that was a surprise to them, that they believed that psychologists could bill for these codes. The problem is we've been having this conversation since October, November, and really haven't gotten any clearer resolution about whether psychologists can or cannot bill for consultation. That's why my client did a survey with practicing psychologists in the field. 86% of the psychologists who responded said that they either did not bill for consultation codes or were denied for consultation codes. When they were asked, why didn't you bill? Most of them were told that historically they've been denied for consultation codes and they stopped billing because it wasn't worth the effort. Now, insurance, I don't come here a lot for good reason. Insurance is a very complex issue, and you folks are the experts on that. I believe that Anthem and Point 32, in good faith, told us they believe these should be covered. But I do know from my clients that they are not covered. I can't bridge that divide to know where the truth lies.
All right, there you have it.
Yeah.
many
So
things. So many layers.
I know. I want to start by just kind of letting us react a little bit because there is a lot there. So I'm curious to hear your reaction. Also want to just encourage our listeners. We'll put the link to the full video and like the timestamps because it's a 5-hour long committee meeting. We'll put the timestamps and the show notes. And like later the insurance representatives come up. There's a bunch of he said, she said. Anyway, there's more to see there, but I think this gave us a great starting point. So what are some of our reactions from our panel members here?
Well, I think I'll level set a little bit for us, so there's this issue, and this happens a lot where, you have supposedly a way to bill something. And it's hard to get everybody involved on the same page related to, can we bill? Can we not bill? And to get a straight answer. And so in this case, this gentleman had been at this for, I think it was over a year and a half, trying to clarify, just try to clarify, can we bill? Can we not bill? And then the insurance company is saying, well, yeah, no, we think you can bill. But then on the other hand, they're serving people, clinicians, and they're not getting paid for the codes. Right. And that I think is a point that people should understand, that a lot of times there are rules, and it's not even the rule that's the problem, but it's actually the mechanism by which the rule is carried out. So that could be like another arm in Anthem or the insurance company or the state Medicaid system, if you're talking about that just doesn't know or doesn't have a mechanism for enforcing that rule, doesn't have processes to audit and make sure that that's being carried out, et cetera. And so it's not a rule issue. It's just it's a process issue that, is at play. So that's one of the things happening here. The other thing is that you see how the general public has really very little knowledge of, like, even just the guilds and what they do and what they don't do. Right. I mean, there's confusion about what psychologists do, what the psychiatrist does, or, what the scope is, et cetera. So that becomes just part of part of the education that is difficult for advocacy purposes, because people just don't understand why this happens, or why these kind of things don't happen. And it also shows you, I think, the difficulty that regulators have, right? Because this is a group of basically regulators at the state level, and they then have to kind of come in between other parties and help facilitate like communication in an area that they don't have a lot of knowledge in, right? Because like there's just like a couple of people on this panel that like seem to sort of get it, you know. So I think that just sort of gives you a sense of what the landscape is for advocacy. And if you don't understand that landscape, you may get frustrated because you're like, I keep telling people this and it's a great idea and it works really well and it's so good for everybody and it's going to save people money, and all this kind of thing. But you have to understand there's a whole lot more that has to go into the education and the bringing of people together into a good working relationship. So anyway, that's I think a good way to level set the circumstance.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think education and communication is really important, and oftentimes what's missing, because then those regulators then create a bill or approve a bill or something without sometimes some crucial pieces, because they don't have the education and don't get to hear from the people who are doing the work to maybe understand why some piece of legislation isn't working the way that they thought it was, right? Because they make the legislation and they say, okay, go, and then that's it. It's out there and we all have to follow it. There's not a whole lot of follow-up that's happening once the legislation comes out, unless individuals then go and start complaining and advocacy days and all of that kind of stuff. I cringe often while watching the video segment, and I like Grace said, encourage individuals to go and watch the rest of it. Neftali gave you some pieces of like the insurance industry comes up, just to have them come up and be like, well, I just found out, last month. Well, I didn't even know that. It's like y'all are in front of the people that make the decision, but yet there's all of this lack of communication that's already happened. Even, lobbyists, and I love them. We deal with lobbyists. I'm here in DC now. We have lobbyists. What they can do is only as good as the information that they have. And so sometimes it's very choppy. And so there's even one point where he's like, well, I don't know why they're not getting paid. That's just what they told me. Right. And it's like, so now he doesn't have the additional information to bring forth that he's being asked. It's so much misinformation that it's oftentimes very damaging.
And we as a field have not done a good job of positioning ourselves. And some of it is that it's new. And I know there's totally, we've had lots of talks about that, about literally the newness of integrated care as a whole is a huge part to do with it. But in general, we're using terms interchangeably. There's a lot of not straight from the source. It's kind of like, oh, I heard this from somebody, or I heard this from somebody. And in general, I'm going to call out all of us mental health providers. There has been a lot of the holdup in integrated care isn't coming from the medical side. A lot of it is coming from mental health professionals who do not want to change the way that they practice, and practice in a way that actually gets more out to the masses. Now, there's lots of reasons behind that. It's not because people are good people. There's a lot of misinformation at baseline, but I do think that we have to talk about things in more clear terms as mental health professionals. And I think that we need to recognize that we cannot practice the way that we've been practicing. We will not reach the mass of the people and make the difference that we want to make if we continue doing things the way that we've always done.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because even in this segment, you see that there was so much blurring of ideas and concepts, right? So the situation that was presented, which it was interesting to me, was really just a crisis situation, right? It's like someone's in crisis in someone's exam room, and the provider needs someone in there. And then um, somehow that was blurred with the need for this consultation code, right? Which I think, it's interesting. I don't know New Hampshire um, law terribly well, but in most states, yes, there may be a crisis consultation code. Most people don't end up using those codes, but you could still bill like typically a straight 90832 code or 90834 code for a consultation with a patient, right? And so that may actually be an issue with mental health professionals who are rigidly saying, well, no, we need to, this is a crisis consultation. We got to build a crisis code, kind of a thing. So that may be an issue, educational issue on their part. But then part of the conversation blends into the guy brings up collaborative care. And I'm like, I mean, yes, you may have a psychiatrist that's on call for a crisis, but that's not what collaborative care is, right? I mean, like, you'd be enrolling someone in depression care, and the psychiatrist will review them when it's time for their review. But that's not what that is either, right? And so that there was all this blurring of kind of situation and circumstance that was really frustrating to listen to, because then it leaves people feeling even more like, oh, well, this is just a broken system.
Right. So I'm wondering, first of all, I want to take a temperature check, and then I want to talk about something that I see happening in the clip that we watched, and even in our conversation that's happening in our podcast panel right now. But how does it feel? How did you feel watching this clip? How does it feel even to talk about these misconceptions and confusions and barriers that we're facing?
Confused, frustrated, a little hopeless. Like, if they don't
Okay.
have it figured out, and I'm a new learner trying to bring this to my neck of the woods, and I'm not even a behavioral health person, I'm medical. What chance in heck do I have of getting everyone to understand, see the shared vision, describe how we bill for it? It feels slim to none shot of making that float, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, I think cringe is the word I would use. I mean, it just cringe and a little bit of embarrassment. It's like, to Bridget, to your point, yes, integrated care is new-ish, but I've been at this for 22 years, and it feels bad. The conversations, some of them anyway, are still at this level. Right now, to be fair, I don't think every conversation of this kind is at this level at this point. Like, there are lots of conversations that are actually at higher levels. We've pointed out in past podcasts how these conversations are now happening at higher levels of government, especially at the federal level. But I think this conversation is particularly instructive at how at the very local level, at the very, very local levels, a lot of times these conversations are cringe, and it makes me feel frustrated and yeah, a little bit. I don't know if hopeless is the right word, because I'm like an eternal optimist, I think, but like, just like, oh man, I mean, there's so much we'd have to unpack to get everybody just level set on the basic conversation here. It's like, you got to go back to the basics.
Yeah.
As
And
as
yeah.
as cringy as it was, I was like, well, at least it's being talked about, and I have such a low. Or maybe I'm an eternal optimist. I have such a low bar of like what folks know, that I was like, it wasn't good. I mean, it was cringeworthy. Like, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, hey, at least they wanted a psychologist there. Like, that's like the level that I'm at, because
Yeah.
I say that in some ways when folks come to our internship, I'm like, if they haven't had any integrated care experience, I'm like that. They're in some cases way better off, because the amount of unlearning about like that PCBH is superficial. We're not really doing real work. It's not really psychotherapeutic. It's not really X, Y, and Z. Like, we spend so much time just having to unlearn, like within our own field, or that PCBH is 1 to 4 visits, and it's for mild to moderate problems, and all these things that just aren't even true and are not really founded anywhere. So, I don't know. As cringy as it was, I was like, well, it wasn't the worst I've heard.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say the word hopeless. I think I do identify as optimist like you guys too. I feel like it's evolution of being okay with the fact that it's a continual education awareness spreading thing. And like that, me personally, I've like accepted that. At first it was like, how come you guys don't know this? Then it's like, oh, okay, this is something we're just going to put on repeat and talk about and keep talking about, teach, reteach, and trying to be okay with that. Like I don't know, you guys are the smart psychologists. Is that like a radical acceptance? Like, I'm just going to accept it. I'm not going to be able to change the fact that we're going to have to talk about this and get everybody on the same page. I'm going to try to embrace the fact that we're just meeting people where they are with knowledge, and instead of spinning my wheels, getting frustrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. And I think that
Yeah,
there's room for
that makes
all of that.
Okay.
I will say I felt pretty defensive. When they're saying, well, so you're saying a psychologist is going to tell, like, no, you're saying that. And so you're saying that this is going to happen. What? Like, I felt defensive. This is my field. This is something I care really passionately about. And like, I want to correct all of these things. But then what I saw in that conversation and what I see even happening in our panel is that there are multiple levels of conversation that need to be happening. We're talking about big picture things, but then getting caught up in the details and the nuance of, and oh Lord, if you want to hear some nuance, they're talking about, to where if you keep listening, they talk about, can we change this word from like this to that? Can we like get some wiggle room in there? And like, I get that that's what policy is. And I get that that's really important because of the implications of those specific wordings. But if we can't agree on the big picture or the details, then we get so caught up in like, this big conversation is happening. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you can't see, but I'm making this big circle with my hands. It's this big circle. And then we get so fixated on this one little corner of it over here. And then we end up using all of our time arguing and fighting about whether this one thing is right or not. That then the conversation's over. The meeting gets turfed to the next week. The insurance people come and are like, oh, well, that's not exactly how this happened. And so then it undermines all of our credibility as well. And when we're defensive, not to get back to, no, I'm going to get back to you. So my neurobiology passion area of dysregulation that I just keep talking about, the area of our brain that feels the need to protect and that feels angry and feels frustrated and feels like this, I'm being attacked, is not the area of our brain that can reason and make decisions and make clear communication. And so we have to recognize that in ourselves and engage in our regulation strategies in the moment to like calm that down so that we can listen to what's actually being said, because the message gets crossed. And I mean, this is such a key, crucial example of miscommunications and misinterpretations. And if we cannot get to the heart of what's actually being said so that we can correct that and then pivot back to like what we're actually talking about, then we're not going to get anywhere. But we cannot do that if we are defensive and overwhelmed and in our anger in that moment during that conversation. Bring that to the podcast, y'all. Bring that to CFHA. Bring that to your consultation group and your peers and your people and your team. But don't take that to advocacy and policy conversations, because you're not going to be able to connect.
So well said. So well said. Yeah. And it'll also lead to the demonization of your opponent, right? It makes it, where you're fighting against an opponent instead of trying to create a collaboration, right? And typically insurance companies fall in that category. And I'm going to say something kind of out of both sides of my mouth here. So on the one hand, I think that the fundamental structures of insurance-based health payment have evil in them. They have systemic issues in them that are just, let me use a non-moral term, right? They are not good for the promotion of health in the country, right? That does not mean that I think that insurers or the people that work at insurance companies are evil, or that they're bad, or that they're trying to do bad things, right? You can say both those things at the same time. So this is a good example of it. And I've seen this happen many, many times over many situations where, a lot of what is happening with an insurance company is simply that they don't have the incentive to, and they often don't have the mechanisms within their organization to adequately enforce rules that they themselves may have. And I've seen this at the Medicaid payer level. I've seen this at the commercial level. That's the idea of there's a rule, but there's like 5 layers of bureaucracy managing something, and one little data person who doesn't talk to anybody, nobody talks to them, handling claims and all that kind of thing. And there's not a channel, there's not a pathway to enforce a rule. And there's not an incentive to do so because it's not a big deal to them. There's no real financial or other incentive for them to get this right on any consistent level. And that happens a lot with behavioral health because it's not a big ticket item typically. And so that thing that we want to see, the payment for the service or whatever on a consistent basis, ends up not happening consistently. And then it becomes a situation where literally the main question is between the provider and the payer. Who do I talk to? Right? That becomes the main question. It's like, who do I talk to? And I've had conversations with people at the higher levels of the insurance in an insurance company, and they don't know who to talk to within the organization to get that thing fixed. Right? They may want to, they don't quite know how to make that happen. Right? So that becomes the nature of the issue there. When that's the issue, then we need to kind of adopt a collaborative stance and say, all right, well, can we figure this out together? Can we figure out who we need to talk to? Can we figure out and then work at it over months to make sure we work through the organization, the channels, the emails, to make sure we finally get to that person who has the power to hit the click button, to turn something on.
Yeah.
That becomes a more productive way than if you demonize your opponent and think they're actively against integrated care.
Yeah.
There's a couple pearls in that and in what we watch too, in terms of, when there's not an incentive or when there is a disconnect from what we're asking for and the perceived impact of it, that is where story makes a big difference. So I can feel as like a tiny fish in the very big sea. Like somebody else needs to be having these conversations. Somebody else needs to be, doing this work. Who am I? Like, I'm nobody. But to recognize that as the person doing the work, we're the people with the stories, and we're the people that do understand those impacts. And those stories are what is stories and data, spoiler alert, I'm going to say data too. So he brings a survey and he talks about like what's actually happening for a group of providers, which I think his client might be the New Hampshire Psychological Association. Like, I think he's the lobbyist on their behalf, is my perception. Regardless, we can feel like, oh, it's lobbyists that need to do this. But no, we have the stories, we have the data. And not that, when I was saying earlier, put your anger aside for this, don't lose your passion though, because we are not cold and disconnected. And we have to come back to, no, this isn't just about dollars and cents. This isn't just about shall or may. And like this very specific wording in a very sterile room in a Capitol or in an executive's office or wherever it is. This is about the patients that we're serving every day. So when we take those stories and we take the meaning, and when that doctor in this committee meeting spoke up and said, actually, I have experienced this, and here's how it makes a difference to my patients, intuitively, everyone's like, well, yes, this should be happening. Like, that makes so much sense. And so we've got to connect with the stories. We've got to connect with the data, even as we're coming back to that, to keep us focused.
Yeah.
The stories is actually what I feel like gives it the power, because there's power behind the story. It's no longer than this kind of abstract words on a page in their agenda. Like, they can then relate it. The stories are actually where the power is. And I oftentimes say policy is practice and practice is policy. And I know a lot of times we have our head down and we're doing the work and, we're plowing through, we're seeing, patients, and that's what we're doing. We have to take some time to lift up and be able to talk to the people on that. I too don't know New Hampshire rules, right? But go and have a conversation with the people on that committee to explain, right? Because then there's some education, information, a story, all those things that you could provide to try to connect the dots where there are these missing pieces and blanks. Um, yeah, I believe everybody should be doing some type of advocacy work. You're not the small fish in the pond. You're actually a pretty big fish. Without you, things don't keep going. So you actually are a pretty big fish, and sharing your story is the piece that's missing for a lot of individuals on the policymaking level.
Yeah, I can agree with that for our listeners. It's hard for me
Yeah.
to accept that for myself.
Oh, 100%, right? You got to lean into the whole like, wait, my opinion on this, my experience matters. It's something I do. We had a situation like that in Illinois where in 2019, Governor Pritzker signed into law that it must be mandated that Medicaid and all insurers pay for collaborative care codes. So we're like, woohoo, we can finally bill for this, except it wasn't on the fee schedule. And we had so many conversations with people way more powerful and connected, smarter than me. CEOs like, well, it's supposed to be, it's by law. How come it's not turned on? Who do you talk to? How do you find that person? Years of that. We just now got to see it on the fee schedule last fall. So it took over 2 years from when it was mandated by law that Medicaid paid that we actually got to bill for it. So, and as much as that was frustrating, when I think back of like, well, what turned the corner? It was actually some collaboration. It was like folks from Advocate Health System outside Chicago. There was a Illinois Hospital Association, Kennedy Forum. We all got on a little conference call and we're like, hey, Medicaid, flip the switch. These codes need to be turned on. And it might have just been someone in a room somewhere that was like, oh, okay, I didn't know this was supposed to be turned on. So it was hard to connect with that person. But I think we did do some good looking around our community, our larger community, our state, and going like, oh, you all agree this is a good thing too. So cool. So I think we did find a silver lining there, which started out feeling hopeless and like, screw it, if I can't fix this, then if they can't, then there's no hope in heck for me to be able to. But when we kind of found our colleagues and our people in our like-minded, motivations, like, oh, maybe we did actually move the needle there. So yeah, I think that's a win in the long term. Ain't perfect, but it's something. So
Yeah, I think you have to be a Karen. I mean, you have to learn how to be a Karen. And I can say that because my wife's name is Karen.
I'm dying over here. I can't.
We're a Chad. You can be a Chad. But yeah, maybe not a Chad. Grace is shaking her head. But definitely Karen. You want to get some stuff done, right? I mean, and you get stuff done by saying something. And it's absolutely true. I'll give you another story. I think that Illinois story is a great example of that, right? Several years after you thought you won, right? Just to kind of get the procedures in line, right?
Yep.
And that's the important thing to remember about these things. It's people. It's always about people. And so my wife was frustrated about something in the emergency department last year. It's been a not a good place. Emergency departments nationally are not really healthy. And it was something related to the state. She literally emailed 2 or 3 representatives that day. She is the last person to advocate. She's just a clinician. She got emails back from like 2 of their offices and a phone call from one of the representatives. He was driving on the way to his home from the Capitol, and they had like a 45-minute conversation about the issue. Same day, right? So you never know when you make that extension, who you're going to get to, which human being you're going to connect to. And when I say be a Karen, I mean, be persistent, right? If you're persistent enough as a human being, you're going to eventually get there, right? You can outlast the system problem.
Yeah. I'm going to pull through some pearls of what I've heard you guys say as we're starting to wrap up this conversation, just in thinking about time, that advocacy happens at every level, that our skills as communicators and collaborators are crucial in this environment, in this conversation, as we're working to regulate ourselves, to remember the big picture and the specifics, but also to engage with the stories and the data and persistently connecting to find the people who are the decision makers about these things that make so much of a difference, but sometimes hinge on a word. And that there is power in connection, there's power in persistence, there's power in clarifying our message and being clear about what it is that we're saying and not losing sight of that focus for the nitty-gritty details. but being ready to jump back and forth between, well, no, that's not exactly it, but then back to that. I will say, I think that's the one thing I felt was missing a little bit from the clip that we saw. Maybe this is the role of, oh my gosh, the lobbyist that doesn't have all the information, but to clarify and pivot, and I tell our residents to do this all the time. When you're talking with a patient who is just not making sense of what you're saying, restate what they said and then pivot back to the question that you actually asked. And this is true, I think, when we're, engaging these conversations too. We can correct a misconception and then redirect the conversation back to where it needs to be. But to engage with curiosity, to engage in good faith, but with persistence and with passion for these things that we believe are so important. And that no one is too insignificant. No one is insignificant to do this work. It's happening at every level. It's happening in every system. It's happening in every clinic. It's happening in every state. And I deeply believe that our members and our listeners are the people who have the voices to affect this change. And so I'm feeling, I'm trying to shift my frustration and defensiveness into looking for action. And I think that's too a really crucial piece to keeping going. When we sense the injustice, when we recognize systemic inequities, which is a lot of what we are needing to advocate for, that we see that and we feel the pain of it. We feel maybe the hopelessness of it or the disappointment about the injustices, but we pivot that into finding our path for action. Because if we don't do that, then we're stuck in our hopelessness and we're not helping anybody. And so we have to pivot into finding what is the piece where I can work to affect change, because that energizes, that fuels us back, and not in isolation, but in collaboration with each other. To that, if anybody has anything they want to add. Anything I
Isn't Grace
missed.
awesome? Grace is awesome. She summarizes things like no one.
Drop the mic. Like,
Let's-
get out there and do some stuff.
Get out there and do it. That's the
I could also
challenge.
say we're rooting for you, New Hampshire. So get this.
Yeah,
Yes,
we're rooting for
absolutely.
it. Absolutely.
For sure.
Well, I am so pleased to have had our full group here today. And as part of his transition away from us, Deepu has continued to record our closings. And so we are going to listen to a closing from Deepu before we end for the month. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you, Neftali, Bridget, Monica, and Jen for being here with me. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we'll talk to you again next month.